Okay, here we go. This is Wednesday, the 1st of July.
Oh my God.
And how's it going?
Going well. Yeah, going well. I have Anne she emailed me an essay like last week um that I've been working through, and I've been drawing out some interesting ideas from that. So I want to talk to you about them.
Sure.
I forgot the author's name. I don't have it written down, but basically the whole essay is just kind of interweaving and it's like kind of a critique, but Schusterman's book Body Consciousness, do you know?
I'm not familiar with that.
It's kind of weird. I just ordered it because I want a little more information, but he's basically like merging somatics and philosophical frameworks. He's taking certain philosophers like Simone de Beauvoir and so on and so
Mhm.
forth, their frameworks that they've created about like morals and values and relating it to their biography, and then kind of looking at it through a lens of the experience of their body from what we know throughout their life.
Mhm.
Um, and anyway, so she's kind of talking about somatics in the context of his writing, and then also um, kind of like a larger critique of contemporary somatics in general. But it's really interesting. And um, anyway, there's this idea I've been going back to in that essay that I feel like you would have good thoughts about. But she talks about gestural habitus a lot and how, and I know like the concept of gesture through a more like
Mhm.
theoretical level because I've like read that in like queer theory and feminist theory and so on and so forth. But um, just obviously the way that we pattern ourselves unconsciously to then like exist in space in a certain way and repeat these kinds of physical or mental patterns, and how that's very much related to like culture and the body. And then I was like, okay, that's an interesting idea. And what if I picked that up and put it um, in the context of like academia and talked about like tried to figure out a way to articulate what like institutional or academic habitus is in terms of the body, and like then after I like articulate that, then try to counteract it with somatic work.
Mhm.
But first I need to like figure out what that actually looks like and how to go about that. But I thought that'd just be interesting to ask you about your thoughts on that. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like an interesting approach
Mhm.
and uh, resonant with what you're doing with your project in general.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and I guess just like I don't really know if there's a way for me to fully be like, this is like the kinds of physical experience or like physical habits that are developed out of existing in the institution, like what point blank. I just don't know if I can like say that concretely, but I can probably like vaguely. I
Mhm.
don't know. I don't know if that is like possible, but I've
Yeah.
just been thinking
So
about it.
I would be curious. I mean, there's a few ways that you could um, giving that some thought. Um, the first thing that comes to mind is wondering if you can, or thinking about overlaying that idea and seeing if there's other things that people have done um, that address that from another angle, like not necessarily that I think you're not necessarily going to find And it would be interesting to find some sources that are taking the same idea but using different language. Um, I'm just trying to think. I'm thinking just what other work might, in a way, back that up,
Hmm.
like back that up objectively.
Hmm.
Um, Nothing immediately is coming to mind, but um, I guess a place to start would be what, so if we're if you're anchoring with this concept of habitus, what do you see? And like you said, uh, well, what do you what are there very specific things that you see that you can talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I think the impact of screens is just like a widely accepted physical impact, you
Okay.
know. And like going further than that, what that does to like a sense of space for a person.
Hmm.
Um, I feel like that is very concrete. And then also, I don't know, I feel like postural impacts, um, and like I don't really know, like certain kinds of um because a lot of it like body mind centering works with like body patterning, right?
Oh,
Like developmental patterning. And then other things work with like evolutionary development of movement. And like there's all these like frameworks that are working together.
yeah.
Um, and so I was like, okay, that's helpful. And like I knew that, but it was helpful to read it because then it's like I can use these things to be like, these are like accepted frameworks and like somatics is working within that. But then it's also using that to provide an opening for people to even be receptive to their own subjective experience when they might have not already because they're like, oh, like this is kind of out there and like whatever. But if you're like, no, this is actually kind of like working off of this already existing framework.
So yes, and also I think it's good to be cautious there because
Yeah.
one of the things about that is that those sorts of so I would liken this to a pretty common experience in yoga in terms of how over the last really 30 years anatomy has, and even before that, but on a kind of mass scale, progressively anatomy in yoga and somatics falls into this as well because there's somatics has become a an avenue within yoga, but anatomy in general, which is a kind of scientific framework,
Hmm.
um, has become a currency of authority
Mm,
within yoga.
I
And
like that term. Just gonna write that down. Um,
so and it goes along with what you're saying in the sense of yoga being alternative, yoga being not so yoga arising, especially there's a longer history than this, but there was this growth of yoga in the 60s and early 70s that really rode on the countercultural movement, but it was still very much counterculture, like yoga was not yoga was not a mass market activity the way it started to become in the roughly the around the turn of the millennium
Mhm.
into and has just expanded from that. So it was this alternative thing, and not only that, but it was from another culture and um, was therefore like put up against science. Uh, there's always been always, but in many settings, there has been questioning of yoga's legitimacy as a, a viable system of knowledge and practice. And even before, this is true in India also. And one of the things that so it's very interesting. Um, Hatha yoga, especially yoga most closely associated with asana, was regarded as the domain of like often like street people and pickpockets and vagrants, basically. And so that dynamic was in play there and then, like in the middle of the 20th century and before. And Iyengar was not the only person to do this, but uh, this is most clearly seen with the development of Iyengar's work. He actually, um, there was a point, so he studied with Patabi Joyce, kind of broke off from Patabi Joyce and started doing his own thing. And around that time, uh, he befriended a doctor, and that doctor, he had long interactions with this doctor, and they would do demonstrations together. Like this was the initial thing. This is not so well known, but this is where a lot of that scientific and anatomical framework got uh, combined into Iyengar's method. And I'm sure not just unconsciously, but very consciously. I mean, some of it was just this thing happened, but there were, I think, very clearly, Iyengar had an awareness that this was a pathway to more legitimacy.
Yeah, definitely. Did he sub? I thought
Patabi Joyce.
Patabi Joy studied with him. It
No,
was the other way
no.
around.
Uh, so sorry. No, so Krishnamacharya.
Yes.
So he didn't break off from Patabi Joyce. He broke off from Krishnamacharya. So um, both Iyengar and Krishnamacharya, both Iyengar and Patabi Joyce studied with Krishnamacharya.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Because I know that she was the first woman in the Western world to teach yoga.
No, that's Indra Devi.
Oh, yes. Okay, sorry, I get them
Okay.
mixed up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Different.
So um uh Iyengar and Patabi Joyce were roughly concurrent, but
Okay.
Iyengar and actually so Krishnamacharya, the older teacher,
And that's your lineage?
well, I've studied in a few different of those. So Krishnamacharya, any like vinyasa style comes from Krishnamacharya through Patabi Joyce.
Okay, so she developed that from from learning from him, kind of.
But Indra Devi is off on another.
Yeah, she did something else. Yeah, okay.
Well, so she studied with Krishnamacharya,
Hmm.
a little bit after Iyengar and Patabi Joyce
Okay.
did.
Got it. So many people. Okay.
Yeah. So and sorry that I mixed up the names. That made it confusing. So a note on for the video. But there was a little bit of concern with anatomy and biomechanics among other parts of that lineage and among other teachers, but it really crystallized with Iyengar.
Hmm.
And and that was influential to the whole thing as yoga began to expand into Europe and then into America. And there's that is kind of amplified and reflected and as a way to so there was, in other words, in India, as yoga was taking this new approach post World War II, pre and post World War II, it anatomy and the interface with science became a way to make it more legitimate.
Hmm.
And then there's a mirror of that because, as you can imagine, this practice that is uh, from a different country, there's going to be some suspicion about its provenance and whether it's effective or not. And so making it more scientific is a strategy for
It
legitimacy.
drowns like the Eastern mysticism
Yeah,
of it all. Yeah,
yeah.
totally.
And so why I bring all that up is that anatomy has this signification as scientific, but it occupies this kind of gray area because how one uses anatomy and physiology in a practice like yoga has a looseness to it.
Yeah.
And this is, I would say, true of somatics as well. So that can mean a lot of different things. And um, the original point stands of yes, these systems are are establishing a framework of comprehensibility and legitimacy in the connection with science, but it's also important to recognize that that means the interpretation, it is an interpretation of science.
Yeah.
It is an interpretation of anatomy, which is true of science itself, but the process, just to say, the process is not always the scientific method as it sometimes like true sometimes it is more so, sometimes it is less so.
Hmm. Also, I feel like for somatics, like there's always this space between like not really I have a problem, but it's like there's an injury or like there's something like I feel like a lot of people that develop a modality start from a place of like urgency about
Mm-hmm.
I need to like fix something.
Mm-hmm.
So then I feel like there comes this thing of a lot of the learning and a lot of the kind of like not anecdotal evidence, but like subjective experience that's really pushing the modality forward is
Yeah.
this the gap between the injury or the problem and like the healing or the it's like in that
Mm-hmm.
space. And I think that that itself can be extremely challenging to articulate in a way of like, this is where the work or like the method is actually happening, or like we're even like always developing it. I feel like because like that space is going to be different for everybody and like is going to look different.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's so like it necessitates a subjective experience, like recognizing the fundamentally different experience of every person, it's really hard to kind of quantify that, which I think is why it's feels difficult to me to bring this into a space like this, because I'm like, there's no way for me to say like this is exactly what's going to happen for you and here's when it's going to happen and how. So, but I think that's also interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is interesting. Um, but I also think like that gap is important to talk about. And it also like kind of showcases the point, maybe for me at least. But um and obviously not everybody's like coming to these things with like, oh, I have a serious issue or like I have a really bad injury or I have
Yeah.
something. But I do think there's always like some kind of search for help or like healing in some capacity. So
Very often.
very often.
Very often.
Or curiosity,
Yeah.
even. Like I'm really
Yes.
curious about how my body's working and like I want to understand.
Yes. Always, I would say there's some impulse of that, like curiosity, like for instance, Bonnie didn't start from a crisis in herself,
Yeah.
though she had a crisis later on that really informed some shifting in her work.
What was
Um,
that? I don't know about that.
so um, so Bonnie, um, in terms of Bonnie's established credentials, she did occupational therapy at Ohio State, which is a very progressive occupational therapy program. She This was again 60s and 70s. So within that countercultural movement, studied all kinds of other things. And um, so within occupational therapy, as in certain branches of physical therapy, there's an interest and an emphasis on developmental movement. So and a big interest of hers was always kids, babies, kids. And that formed the basis of her work.
Mhm.
And then she attached other things to it.
Yeah.
All the body system work, like she studied visceral manipulation. Her husband was a Aikido
Yeah.
practitioner, and there's in, so she was her work was brewing in this mix of a whole bunch of different disciplines. And then around late um late 90s, had um she had to stop teaching basically, and had I forget exactly, I don't remember exactly the dates of this, but she had to stop teaching, and fatigue, she got burned out basically.
Makes sense,
and
honestly.
and then I would say her work post that wasn't really in contradiction to what she had done before, but there were certain refinements. So yeah, where she started was not from a crisis, but the definitely there's a story of a crisis in there, which is not that's not the case for everyone. So like with a lot, and similarly, I think sometimes it's like with Ida Rolf, for instance, similarly, it's just there's this curiosity about how the body works, and so it can be about seeing for someone who goes through a more like for someone who goes through an osteopathic training or a physical therapy training or something like that, it's about seeing crises reflected in other people. And so this is another brand of the story that is it's the crisis, but the practitioner is seeing the crisis in other people, and their current worldview doesn't have the understanding or the means to solve it, and so they go off to some different perspective. They find some different perspective in some way, and then they go to the mountaintop and they get this new information.
Yeah.
So it's similar. It's just that the crisis was not necessarily a health crisis within them, but they were working with people and seeing this thing, didn't have a way before the revelation, didn't have a way to articulate how to work with it, and then developed this thing that now they do.
I think that's so interesting because as you were talking, I was thinking about how my whole like interest and argument with this project is that I think that like we're in crisis with like there's like a crisis of bodies in higher ed. Um, but I don't think that it's recognized, and I also don't think that I don't know. I think there's like a culture of not um taking action until like everything is broken down, you know? And so it's like,
or until it reaches a threshold.
or yeah, or like a point where there's something that is unable to be, you know. And even here, like I see that, you know, it's like people won't slow down and won't start to become aware of their body until they get sick for 3 weeks from burnout or something like that. And then it's like, okay. So I think it's interesting to kind of make that connection and also to be like, this is what is the word? Like preventative, maybe. Like this is a kind of like preventative means from that larger scale crisis.
Yeah, and again, kind of along the lines of our previous conversations, I think it would be a good thing to have that front and center in what you present.
The fact that this is like preventative work.
That, but even before that, that there is a kind of crisis.
Yes,
there is an unrecognized crisis.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And
that, in a way, the expressions of that crisis are the habitus.
mm. Um, and I also think I need to be very particular about like the tangible practices I'm like inviting with this argument or not this idea of like there's a crisis and like this is like what we might do because and the author in this essay was talking about this and I've read about this in other things where it's like somatics can often have language about we're returning to like our natural state, right? Like our origin.
Right.
But then very soon that starts to become kind of cloudy into like, okay, this is like a natural body.
Right.
But then it actually becomes like erased and neutral and like devoid of life and like experience. And I think that that's really what I'm not into. And like, I don't want to frame it that way. And like, I don't know, from like a more radical perspective, like what are the like social and political constructions of somatics that can actually help us be like more in the world as like full
Mhm.
organisms or whatever. Um, and I think that like she was talking about mainly Alexander and Feldenkrais, which are obviously older.
When was this
This was
essay?
published, this is old. It's published
Okay,
in
I think I have read this.
2011.
Yeah, very, could you send it to me?
I can also just find it right now. I have it in my
Yeah.
email. I don't have my but
Because I think maybe I have read this essay,
yeah, it's
but it's been a while.
really good. But it's yes, Isabel Gugnol.
Mhm.
From Schusterman's Soma Aesthetics to a Radical Epistemology.
Yeah.
It's really good.
But if
Um,
you could send me the link, that
yes,
would be great.
I'm gonna do that right now. Um, so, or I'll actually do it because something weird's happening. But anyway, and so just like she was talking about how those are kind of just like outdated.
Mhm.
I don't know, like ideas that are going along with those. But I do think since also this article's been published, a lot of things have shifted in thought, like dramatically around somatic. So I'm not,
Yeah.
it's
And so for instance, I'm very aware of like goings on in both Feldenkrais and Alexander, and there's a quite alive and ongoing dialogue and change in the last 10 years for so there within Alexander technique there were there were two organizations that kind of this happens with Pilates, like there's lots of Ur teachers who claim the mantle of Joseph Pilates, and uh so it's often who is the true lineage of
this isn't
yeah,
traditional. Yeah.
yeah. So there has for a long time been definite contestation about Alexander technique. It's a little bit like the Catholics and the Protestants split off. There was a split of two different organizations, and the one is a little more traditional, and the other is a little more kind of more progressive, one might say, flexible in the interpretation of the tradition. But lately, there's just been uh, a number of different um, perspectives on the Alexander technique, and many of them are kind of, so there's a lot of variety, and many of the shifts are about these sorts of issues.
And that makes sense
And the same is
to
true of
me.
Feldenkrais.
Yeah. Because I also think that there's a lot of like ideas that are bracketed in those two forms where they quickly become like this is how you always must be, or it's like it becomes like an ideology instead of like a I
I
don't know.
will say though that yes, that can absolutely, especially with Alexander
Yeah.
technique, that can happen, a kind of rigidity. Um, at the same time, there is kind of built into both of those systems the opposite of that, but it's often one could say, like a purist could say, well, that happens because the descendants of Alexander are not really living up to what he's talking about, kind of thing, which of course has its own problems.
Yeah.
Um, and one aspect of this, so I've worked with I've studied Alexander technique quite a bit, and it's telling to note that the Alexander people themselves on all fronts are very aware of this. So Alexandroid is a term
So funny.
that was coined within the Alexander. It wasn't, that's not something that came from outside the house, so to
Yeah,
speak.
making fun of themselves.
Or making fun of themselves, but also um, describing someone who is following or trying to do the method in a way that kind of defeats the purpose.
Hmm. Yeah,
So
that's funny. Um, yeah. And then I'm not really familiar with Feldenkrais very much. Is it very different?
it is different. If you ever have a chance to work with it, I recommend it.
Yeah.
It's it's a it's a fantastic practice. So just by way of history, um, Feldenkrais uh, developed his own things and then studied with Alexander, was influenced by Alexander, but his system was and is different.
Mhm.
But those two are often paired.
Okay.
They're often thought of as kind of related in that they are um, in Alexander terms, they're about how one uses the body, the use of the body. Um, they're often from an outside labeling, they're described as, this is not a great way necessarily, but it gets at something. They're described as systems of neuromuscular re-education. They're ways of um, interacting with the neuromuscular connective tissue system to identify, to be, their awareness practices in terms of being aware of the ways that we reflexively restrict ourselves. And then, so this is true of both of them. There's an awareness component, like in Feldenkrais, there are two ways of working. There's called awareness through movement, which are guided movement
Mhm.
practices. And then there's a Feldenkrais session where a practitioner works on someone. But again, there's definitely an awareness component of awareness of restriction and relative freedom of movement, and then the ability to, in terms of Alexander, it's described as inhibition, inhibiting the restrictive reflexive pattern
Mhm.
to allow the pattern of free movement to express.
That sounds like authentic movement to me. A
There's
little bit.
yeah, there is definitely some overlap.
Yeah, that's
And
interesting.
so that article, so I think the critiques of that article are have starting to remember it, are valid, and also it's important to recognize that often with these systems, there's also a basis within the system to self-correct.
Mhm.
It's not always utilized,
Mhm.
and we can talk about, like, I've worked with Alexander technique teachers who are more kind of rigid in their perspective, and I've worked with Alexander technique teachers who have a relationship with their practice that um, allows for nuance and is very effective.
Mhm.
In terms of the Feldenkrais, there's I think I would encourage you to experience it, and there's a YouTube channel. One of the senior teachers I'll send you a link.
Okay.
One of the senior teachers in this country has a channel, and there are other really good teachers. They do workshops online. I will say that Feldenkrais is really actually pretty doable online.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things that's also interesting about Alexander Techniques evolution is that there are a number of teachers who are kind of shifting the trajectory of Alexander has historically been more of a hands-on thing, though Alexander, a big part of his original thing was about verbal cueing. And there wasn't a hands-on component as much,
Okay.
and then the hands-on component became a bigger thing. But there are people like there's this one teacher named Mio Morales who the Alexander he's calling primal Alexander. There's a lot of these people who are trying to, and this happens in a lot of what he's trying to say is this gets back to more of what Alexander's first principles were. There's other people coming from different perspectives who are kind of the way they're talking about it is similar, but he does a lot online. And it is an interesting evolution in terms of making this thing available to the current way of being in the world.
I think that the whole like primal, I feel like
Right.
that is so like happening. I don't know
Yeah.
what's going on, but I think that like the primal diet, like there's all
Right.
these
Yeah,
things
yeah,
happening.
yeah.
And I just am really interested because I
Yeah.
think that that kind of is like, oh, we're returning to like a natural body, or like we're trying to like come back to,
Well, it's saying something about essentials. To be
yeah.
clear, I wouldn't say he's saying we're coming back to a natural pure body,
Okay.
but he is using it, and it is a word that raises flags for me also,
Yeah.
and is interesting in this context. It is, I would say, important to assess how they are using that word. Like in his case, he's trying to say this is getting back to first principles, not necessarily this gets back to the pure body per se.
Whatever that means. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. I keep seeing all these people that are eating such weird things, and they're like, "This is that's related," but it's just making me think of like eggshells and stuff, and like raw things.
Yeah. Not unrelated to this conversation that we're having.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think when like weird things are happening in the world, there's going to be weird reactions, and I think food is like a central part of that.
Yeah. So definitely the whole purity thing, this is not necessarily, this is another aspect of this that would complicate what you're trying to do here, but it's good as a placeholder to recognize that it's happening and you may be aware of it. Just I think this is important to talk about in terms of the pure body kind of thing is how yoga has become a strong association of yoga with like QAnon, with conservative, like Maha, Make America Healthy Again. There's a lot of yoga with this, because that whole thing was driven by moms who
like conservative moms.
Yeah. Well, the evolution of this is, so yoga and somatic, I mean, so in general, somatic practice is still more left coded, but yoga really presented as crunchy and more hippie left wing as it came into this country. But there was a strand, there is that's not a given. And always, again, we can look at parallels in India itself. I would say, if anything, yoga has in India has been more associated with right politics, like Hindu nationalist kind of politics. And it's important to recognize that it's a it's a blank slate in in the sense of mapping mapping ideas about diet and politics onto it can go any of a number of different ways. And there are where we get to America, there are elements of yoga that map on very well to left-leaning ideas, just in terms of interconnectedness and
Unity.
kindness, non-violence. Okay. But there's also, it's very easy to pick out also libertarian ideas. So like, and this is where it started to kind of jump the tracks in terms of shifting, uh, in terms of the anti-vax stuff. There's a lot of yoga people who are anti-vaccine, and that started to, and this is where the healthy moms thing, there's just a lot of yoga teachers out there who are very much in that vein. It's a kind of libertarian, the pure body, kind of natural body sort of thing
Yeah.
really plays into that. And that is still a very strong, that in that is being tested a little bit now, because the Make America Healthy moms are kind of disappointed in what Trump is doing, but it's
Well.
still, yeah,
Like,
yeah.
yeah.
Um, so it is a, we're in this period of cultural expression where it is very interesting how these ideas get used. And uh, in terms of in terms of higher education, its own kind of bonkers world. Um, I think with identifying particular patterns in embodiment, you mentioned the screens. Yeah, I think it might be good to, I think that's a really fruitful thread to work with. Um, I would suggest working with just a few expressions of that,
Yeah, totally.
because if it's too much, it becomes,
I know,
yeah,
nebulous. Yeah.
yeah. And so here, like this, the screen thing, the compressed spine,
Yeah.
uh, being one. And the other thing that comes to mind, uh, is we can, this is not necessarily how I would suggest articulating, but just, or maybe, the nervous system on edge, the
Yeah.
the 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 upregulated nervous system, that the yeah, and how the presentation of that. And I think what's useful about that is that those two things are definitely tied together.
The screens and the,
Yeah,
yeah, definitely.
because this would be good as a way of helping, because again, I think there are ways to talk about this that are relatable to people that people can very easily understand. Um, that the that spending time on screens uh, ramps up tension in the nervous system. And then there are other factors, other influences in life that also have that effect. Like you can talk about time pressure, um, isolation. And in terms of the screens, I think what you mentioned about the perception of space is really important to to bring that into it.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah, and I think all of these things are pretty, people will be like, yeah, I feel that way.
Yeah.
Um, and I also, I think even outside of that, like people that work office jobs and
Yeah.
um,
Ooh, time flies.
are we done?
Oh, it's almost
Wow,
3:30.
that's crazy. Um,
So, and remind me, you wanted to do the short thing. Did we say the 16th of July? Is that
yeah,
right?
that would be
Okay.
great. And then the longer one, the afternoon of the 18th.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. And then do you think so next time, next Wednesday, I could draw out the short.
So would you like to run through it?
Mhm.
Great.
Yeah, that would be
Yeah.
good for
Yeah.
me.
With next week, could we um would we be able to start a little earlier?
Yeah. When is best for you?
Like
We could
even
do one
um
or 1:30.
that's I wouldn't need to do that early, even like 2 would be
Yeah,
great.
totally. Let me just move that up. What day is it? Okay. Two. Great.
Okay. So I'm going to send you a link to some playlists
The
for the
Feldenkrais.
Feldenkrais work. I
Great.
think you will
Yeah,
enjoy
I'm
that.
really curious. It's like just a name I've heard for a long time, but I've
Yeah.
never really had any experience. Um, so yeah, that'd be interesting. I also don't really have much experience with Alexander technique, but my mom is a classical singer,
Hmm.
and so she has worked with it a bunch.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I know it's
It is very
musicians
useful
use
for
it.
yeah, musicians and theater people
Yeah,
are often,
yeah.
which is true for Feldenkrais as well, but maybe not quite so much.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Um, she did a yoga teacher training in 1998.
Hmm.
Um, and so it's just been funny to like, because I did my yoga teacher
Yeah.
training rather recently, and
Yeah.
when I was talking about it, she was like, "We didn't talk about any of this stuff
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
mine." She was like, "We didn't talk about like, um, I'm blanking, just like intersectionality and
Right.
like the
Yeah.
yoga
Yeah.
space.
Yeah.
I don't know, just
Yeah.
like all of that. It's just a
Yeah.
funny
Yeah.
thing."
It's the landscape has changed.
He also, what is it called? It was the big studio in New York that kind of developed their own style out of like Ashtanga Vinyasa, something mudra, something.
There were a few of them.
It's like it's like
Was it David Life and Sharon Gannon?
no, man, I just don't remember. But anyway, I went to a class with her maybe a couple months ago with her
Yeah.
friend who did her training with her, and it was like two. hours. And it was, anyway, it was like the hardest thing I've ever done. And she was like, this was how I trained.
Yeah.
And and I was like, okay, you're annoying. Um, we were doing like an ab workout. I was
Yeah.
like, this is really crazy.
Yeah.
It was really crazy. Um,
Okay.
yeah. Uh,
Okay.